Well, it's a privilege to be invited to be the first speaker on the first event, particularly as you're bringing together ecofeminism with food. Now, I must tell you straight away that I'm the ecofeminism end. My expertise in food, apart from eating too much of it, is not. But I have got more general points to make that are relevant to the food situation. So I hope you do find that they are relevant and they make sense. Also, it seems to me there's been a resurgence of interest in ecofeminism, because I've been around in it for almost as long as it's been going. I wasn't quite one of the originators of it, but I came in not long after. And I was part of that kind of, if you call it first wave ecofeminism. And then it seemed to go very quiet to me. I didn't get any invitations to speak, and it seemed as if nothing much was happening from probably the end of the 90s through to quite far into the beginning of this century. And then suddenly I was getting invites from all over the place, and it seems as if there's been this great resurgence, and initiatives like this show that there has been a resurgence, and that's fabulous, because I am, as you can see, already retired. Hence, that's another word. Emeritus means retired, you know, or it means old. But it's a great relief to me that there is this resurgence, because I can retire now in peace, as it were. What I'm going to try and set out for you is my thinking around. I've called it Ecofeminist Political Economy, although the actual title for this talk was about sustainability and social justice. Now, they are the same thing, because I've been working on this notion of ecofeminist political economy for about 20 years now. So I'll take us from ecofeminism through into my analysis of economics, and I hope that both the ecofeminism and the economics can provide you with some framework for looking at food. Because that I see as one of my tasks. So what's ecofeminism then? Well, a lot of people felt, and right from the early days, when it was called essentialist ecofeminism, and it's all to do with women and nature, it was women caring for the world. This idea of the nurturing woman. I love the touchy-feeliness of that, but my style is slightly different. It's a bit like this. I think that, yes, women do care for the world, but I'm not sure it's such a benign experience as some of the early initiatives. But the reason ecofeminism was vilified by other feminists for being all essentialist and a bit touchy-feely, but a lot of its early people were theologians and were poets. So, of course, they had this very spiritual, poetic type of thinking. You know, earth-based consciousness and those type of things, because those were the people they were. And then you get more hard-nosed, I'm a materialist feminist, you get more hard-nosed people like me come in, and we change the agenda somewhat. And so I've got my own agenda, but I don't in any way disparage the early poets and theologians, because you know, they did things with their material, and that's fine. You need your poets and your theologians, and you need your hard-headed materialists like me. So this is my model, really, of women caring for the world. Oops, going. So I see that my ecofeminism and my materialist ecofeminism, this idea of the materialism of humanness rather than the spirituality and the values of humanism, of human people, as it were, is to do with what I've talked about a lot in my work, which is embodiment and embeddedness. Embodiment is the fact that we have to live, we live in human bodies with all the physicality that makes. But we're also, because we are physical human beings, we are also embedded in nature. We are part of nature. We don't transcend it. We are part of it. We are inside it. So, in fact, not really looking after it as that image at the top. With women caring for the world, we are in the world, we are of the world. But it's not just women who are in the world and of the world. The whole of humanity has its interaction with nature. And I don't see this as a direct interaction. It's not just us as individuals and nature. What the important point of analysis from my perspective here is to analyse the structures of power that intercede between us as humans and the natural world. Because we don't, as I say, we don't do it as individuals. We're not We're not outside of social structures. So my ecofeminism is about looking at the social structures that undermine sustainability and social justice. And particularly, of course, ecofeminism, it would be gender. I see, so in terms of what I call the dialectics of humanity and nature, I see that, have I skipped one there? No. I see that women and their sustaining of nature is essential to the existence of modern economies as we have them. So what I've been talking about through a lot of my recent work, and this is how I've gone from ecofeminism into more economics and economic analysis, is to talk about this concept economic man. Economic man is the mover and shaker. He sits on, like this image says, he sits on top of the world. But economic man, I would argue, and I do argue, I do argue. Thank you, I'm not being hesitant here. Depends on the work of women in nature. So it's not touchy-feely, it's hard, sustaining work that women have to do and nature has to do if economic man is to have his seeming transcendence. So that gives me to come to develop this concept. Sometimes I call it materialist ecofeminism, sometimes I call it ecofeminist political economy, and I can't make my mind up. And if anybody ever analyses my work in the future, they'll be utterly confused and saying, why does she use different concepts? And the answer is because she is confused. But my idea of ecofeminist political economy then is going back to this image of the structures of power, that gender is at the heart of this unsustainability between society, particularly economy, and nature. So gender inequality, I would argue, is the power's unsustainability. It is the transcendence of economic man that creates the unsustainable position. Or to put it another way, modern economies can only exist because of the exploitation of women's work, in inverted commas. And there's lots of problems around that concept, but that's why I put it in inverted commas. Because of the exploitation of women's work and nature's resilience. If it hasn't got all the unpaid labour that women do, if it hasn't got the ability of the natural world to survive, then the modern economies cannot exist. And I drew up this model a long time ago. And this really explains the way the system appears in my head. We all live within the ecosystem. You can't escape the ecosystem. We're all part of it. At the heart of modern economies exists what I call a valued economy. This is the economy that puts an economic value on all its activities. And obviously the key mechanism there is money. The boundary really is a money boundary. And this is why I have moved my work more and more into the analysis of money. If anybody knows my work as it's been going on, started off with books like Breaking the Boundaries on ecofeminism and feminism and ecology, then went through the politics of money, then the future of money. And my most recent one, I'll talk about later, is Debt or Democracy, which is a contemporary analysis of money. So my thinking of the economy in the ecosystem, you've got this kind of Venn diagram where you've got other aspects of existence that overlap with the money market system, but also lie outside of it. So a good proportion of this is women's work, unpaid labour. The classic problem for feminism is unpaid labour, unpaid domestic work. The non-market economy, which is a lot of the things to do with subsistence and sustainability, and all the community activities that go on, that we do, that lie outside of the market. Again, something which feminists have theorised a lot, and I'm sure in terms of food, there's a lot of analysis of food production that goes on outside of the market. And then, of course, you've got ecosystem damage, some of which is paid for, some of which is like clean-up operations, but a lot of it goes without any value and isn't valued and therefore just carries on regardless. So that is my that's my model really. And that's why I called my first book Breaking the Boundaries, my first book on this area, that is. Because to me, there were two boundaries I was concerned about, and why I called it Breaking the Boundaries. One was this boundary of money. What lies inside that system of value, and why do things lie inside that system of value? And why do things lie outside that system of value? What is the barrier? What is the boundary? What is the power that puts something in that middle section and doesn't put it in the other sections? But also, my Breaking the Boundaries was also, I was trying at that time, and I'm talking about the early 1990s now, I was trying to break down the boundary between the newly emerging movement of ecology with the older existing movement of feminism and the even older existing movement of socialism. So I was trying to say we shouldn't have three separate movements, we should combine these movements or find ways of combining these movements. And so that was my political thinking and my analytical thinking. So I developed then the notion of how did gendered economics, what were the symptoms of gendered economics? And I kind of set up, and I've reproduced this all over the place, so some of you might have already seen this. I set up economic man against women's work that is mostly lying outside of the market system, outside of paid labour. And of course we've got to remember that the public sector is inside the money system as well. The money system isn't just the market, it's the market and the public. It's what the societies value and pay for, and what they don't value and pay for. So gendered economics, under economic man, you've got market value, you've got personal wealth, you've got able-bodied workers, you've got labour and knowledge, intellectual property rights and things like that. You've got exploitable resources, you've got consumption and growth. You've got all the concepts and all the description of what is the modern money-based system. And outside of that, you've got women's work, you've got subsistence work, and what I call provisioning work, which is all the work done in the household and in the community. You've got social reciprocity, you've got the sick, the needy, the old, the young. You've got the body, you've got feelings, you've got wisdom. You've got ecosystems, you've got wild nature. You've got needs and you've got sufficiency. So when it comes to the value-based system, you've got, each of them has got their mirror, as it were, that lies outside the framework of value. And obviously what we would want to do, if you're talking about sustainability and social justice, you want to meet the needs of this side of the table, as it were, and not that side of the table. But of course, this side of the far side of the table is the one that has all the power. So this is the dilemma we've got in a gendered economy. So then I talk about, as I said, I'm talking about economic man. Now, the most important thing about economic man is it's not female. It's not male. Nearly did it, didn't I? Economic man can be female. It's not. This isn't a sexual division of labour. It is a social construct. Economic man is a social construct, and many men in much of their lives aren't economic man, and many women in their economic lives are economic man. Economic man has to behave in a particular way, and is not always done. It's not necessarily done by choice either. If you want to be successful in the world, in this world, the left-hand side, if you want to be successful in that world, and to a certain extent, people have to be if they're going to live. They're forced. So I'm not condemning people. They're forced to behave as if they are economic man, and this applies to women as well. If women want to get on in industry, they want to get on in a university system, if they want to, they've got to put aside all their other responsibilities. They've got to pretend they haven't got children. They've got to pretend they haven't got any elderly parents to look after. And this is true of men as well as women. So I'm not making a men bad, women good case here. I'm saying economic man bad and women's work good. But, I'm not saying who necessarily does it, although when it comes to women's work, who does it, I leave that to your personal experience. So what's the symptoms of being economic man? Well, it's disembodiment and disembeddedness. I started off with embodiment and embeddedness, and this is disembodiment and disembeddedness. Economic man is disembodied from what I call biological time. Now, the biological time is the time of physicality. It's the daily cycle that you have to go through. You have to sleep, you have to eat, you have to cleanse yourself, you have to have time to rest, you have to have time to be sociable, otherwise you don't survive. But you also have a life cycle. You have to be born, you have to grow, you have to mature, you have to grow old, you have to die. So therefore, I think the disembodiment is from biological time, which is the rhythm of the cycle of the body through the day and through the lifetime. And what economic man has to pretend is they're never young, they're never old, they're never ill, they're never frightened, they're never scared, they're never weepy. They never need to eat. They never need to sleep. Remember Margaret Thatcher? 4 hours a night, if that. You know, helped by a little whiskey, I think. So an economic man doesn't want to know about if you get sad, if you get unhappy. Society doesn't want to know you. And also, economic man is disembedded from what I call ecological time. The timing of the seasons, the time it takes to replenish and regenerate, the time it takes to counter depletion and destruction, the time it takes for recycling, for toxic breakdown. Economic man doesn't live within that ecological time. Economic man transcends that time, lives a 24-hour day, flies around the world in 24 hours. I think it takes 24 hours to get around the world, doesn't it? Eats anything from any season, any time. Well, that overlaps with food, I'm pretty sure. So seasons don't exist. Regeneration doesn't exist. The nourishment of nature doesn't exist. So this is what economic man is like, disembodied from biological time and disembedded from ecological time. So you've got then, on one side, economic man who's a fat cat. Not always a fat cat, of course, as a lot of people are trapped in that system, but the ones who get the benefit are the fat cats. And on the other side is nature trying to push up its weak little shoot and trying to sustain itself. And the social injustice of those who have to do all the unpaid work and the clearing up work and the nurturing and the nursing and the caring. So I've set kind of these two against each other. So having at the beginning of my academic career mainly analysed the nature and gender relation as such and what the relations are between them, the second shift I made in the latter sort of 10, 15 years of my career, I've paid more attention to the fat cat because I'm interested in what's going on with the fat cat. And I want to know how the fat cat is so powerful and what the secrets are. Because it's no good wringing our hands about the relationship between gender and nature if we can't actually do anything about it. So I wanted to see where is the fat cat's weakness, the fat cat's weakness. And so that's why, and I think the weakness is in the money system, which I'll come on to. Tortuous reasoning, but I hope I get you there in the end. But just summarise then what the problem is of gender inequality and unsustainability. Economic man does not acknowledge the real world of the body and the environment. And so I'm restating what I've already said. Women's work and the natural environment are externalised, and this brings us onto an economic concept, externalised. That means not taken account of in the value system, not paid for, not accorded value, not recognised, not cared for, not nurtured, not noticed, ignored, or I've used the words ignored and marginalised, informal accounting, although they bear the costs of unsustainability. If somebody gets sick and gets poisoned, it can be a cost on the system, but it's more likely to be a cost on the family and on the other people around the person who has been, as it were, poisoned by ecological difficulties and things. And the other thing that I think is quite important is that women's work, a lot of it is in the unpaid or social economy or a lot of it's in the public economy, and therefore this turns my face towards the public sector and the difference between the public sector and the market sector, because a lot of women's work lies in the caring and professions, and a lot of the caring professions are about women's needs and children's needs and the elderly's needs, which all overlap. So this turns me towards money system, it turns me towards what is happening with the fat cats, which turns me towards what's happening to the public sector. And what we find when we turn to the public sector is the feminization of the public. We must be aware of this constant analogy of the state as household, how everything to do with the public sector and public needs is a dependent kind of, there's always this household analogy, like you've got to live within your means, you've got to tighten your belt, you've got to cut your budgets. You can only pay like any other housewife. You've got to be careful with your money. You've got to pay yourself no more than you earn. And these type of things are... So the public sector, the social services are being cut and cut and cut and cut because of this feminization of the public, the state as housewife, the dependency of the public and the public needs. So one of the things I've tried to do in my most recent work is to defend the public sector, defend the right of there to be a public system, or to be the right to sustenance. Again, I'm sure that brings food into it, the right to livelihood, the right to sustenance. So, and what the housewife state must never do, and this brings the connection between the public to my concern with money, the housewife state must first of all avoid debt, because all this austerity stuff is all about cutting the debt, cutting the debt, cutting the debt. And the one thing, but the absolute one thing, that neoliberalism, which has been the dominant economic philosophy for the last 40 years or so, has said over and over again, so much, we all kind of half believe it, the state must never, ever, ever print money. So what this means is that if the state, if a feminized state cannot borrow any money and cannot create any money for itself, then it becomes entirely dependent on the market, entirely dependent on economic man. So we've lost not only in our valued economy that was in the centre of my original diagram, we've lost the public, and the centre valuing has become almost entirely private, entirely the world of the fat cat. And of course what we've ended up with is public poverty. We've ended up with food banks. Oh, gosh, no, that must be where your food analysis is there. The notion of food banks. Can you believe it? A country, is it fifth richest country in the world? And we've got so many thousands and thousands dependent on food banks. And this is down to this feminization of the public sector, which I've called handbag economics, named after Mrs. Thatcher's handbag. And because, of course, she's the one who really viciously promoted this, the idea of balancing the books. The idea that the public must always be limited, the public services must always be limited, and the market must always have priority. And this is a concern of mine, to try and get back this. So what have we lived under in this last 40 years? Shared by New Labour. I'm not saying it was just a conservative thing. It was the philosophy of the era. The feminization of the public economy, the analogy of the state, the public as a household, which I've already talked about. This idea that there's no wealth in the public sector, that there's no such thing as public wealth, that caring for each other, nursing each other, teaching each other, looking after each other has no value. Only the private sector is productive. And we've had to swallow this. We're not allowed to challenge this. Public expenditure therefore must be limited to what the profit-seeking sector can afford. And this ties in then the feminization of the public with the gendering of the economy generally, which means that gender lies at the heart of the modern economic dilemma. So what we need to, so that's a long way around the parish to find the church, but I finally got there. I hope you followed me, is the need to challenge gendered economics. And I don't know how far people in this room are along this path, But one of the words we've got to get rid of is economy itself. And the word that I use as an ecofeminist, and I think a lot of other feminists are using, is the concept of provisioning. Because provisioning covers both the what now is in the market sector, what is in the public sector, but also what is in the social sector. That is, provisioning is the whole, integrates the whole needs of the human being through their bodily cycle, through their life cycle, and through their interaction with nature. It's an integrated concept. The provisioning is paid and unpaid work, paid and unpaid, unmet and unmet needs. So if we start with a concept like provisioning, then we've started to break down the boundaries already. We've started to say some things are more important than just money. So what I'm trying to argue for is what I call gender equal sufficiency provisioning. That is a provisioning concept to embrace women's work and the resilience of nature. So to bring that under the umbrella of provisioning, as well as what we would normally call economics. The concept of sufficiency is very important. It's a concept of enough. Now, if you say, well, it gets rid of this basic needs dilemma. What are people's basic needs? And you add up, oh, you've got to have this, you've got to have that. I think it's a relative concept. If you talk about sufficiency or enough, then you know who's got not sufficient, who people haven't got enough to eat, who haven't got enough to heat, who haven't got enough health care. And you know people who've got too much. You know people who've got 5 houses instead of 1. So we know who's got too much, we know who's got too little. So if we continually help the people who've got not enough, and we continually challenge the people who've got too much, then I think we'll end up with sufficiency. We'll end up with some kind. And the point about sufficiency is it's got to be equal. Because if you're not equal, then some people have got too little and some people have got too much. So it's a nice concept if you ask for sufficiency. It's a good rallying concept. I also think we need to get away from the worst aspects of neoliberal economics, that is the denial of the right to livelihood. People have no right to money, people have no right to food, people have no right to housing, people have no right to care, unless they work. And this kind of lack of humanity in our economy, I think, is important. Obviously, we do have to live within our ecological means, and therefore I would prioritise the life world of women's work. And there is a danger, though, if we do go down the ecological route, and I do see this in a lot of the degrowth and green publications that don't pay any attention to gender, because I think there's a danger you end up with ecological man. That is, economic man suddenly becomes ecological man, and while he's out doing his mantras, women are still clearing up. And there is some evidence that this is happening. You often see in books about degrowth how once you get out of paid work, you can have all this leisure and you can be self-managing. Well, who does the blooming washing up? There's no sense in any of these books that there's anything to do apart from, a little macrame if you felt like it. So I think we have to be very careful that we don't end up with gendered ecology as well as gendered economics. I also am a little concerned about the emphasis on social economics and subsistence, because there's a lot of stuff in that about economics and subsistence. And I'm a bit worried about this, because what happens to the young, the old, the sick, the needy in that kind of system? There's a lot of kind of self-reliance. And that's all right if you're fit, you're pretty well educated, and you don't have, your soil is quite productive, etc. But it's a tough world, subsistence. And I think, well, there's different levels of subsistence, aren't there? And I was thinking, what is subsistence? Well, the most basic subsistence is self-provisioning, self-sufficiency. But I imagine that's a tough life, particularly if you got old and you got sick. It's also defined as usually as non-market production, or sometimes local production and exchange. It's kind of local markets. Somehow a local market's better than a national market, and there's a lot of localism. And that may be true, but I'm not sure, because if we all spread out across the countryside and have a house in every field, I'm not quite sure what happens then. So I would prefer to bring back my concept of sufficiency. whatever economic system we have, whatever provisioning system we have, we should try to make sure we live within our ecological means. So we needn't define it by the type of provisioning we have. It's just how ecologically sound our provisioning is, because it might be possible to have different systems according to different populations or different climates, different geographies. And I do wonder about back to nature. I took this right up in Breaking the Boundaries. Right away, I read back in all this idea of these matriarchal societies, and I couldn't find evidence of any of them. And when I read all the anthropology I could possibly lay my hands on, I thought women had a pretty tough time in nearly all the societies. So I'm with that woman of nature, you know, with the mop. I'm not a romantic about it. And I think there is therefore evidence of women's lives in pre-industrial subsistence communities as being tough and dangerous. And I think the back to nature idea, and of course the other point that isn't on this slide, the first point on this slide as well, is that half the world lives in cities now. So have we missed the subsistence boat anyway? Is it too late? I don't know. I dare say there'll be a lot of debate about that. I dare say people in the room had lots of different opinions about that. But I set up an organisation called the Sustainable Cities Research Institute, and I see you've got a sustainable city as a concept in one of your little leaflets in this university. It seems to me that the route is sustainable cities rather than sustainable communities, because I think we are mainly living in cities now, certainly in urban environments. So I thought going back to the land probably wasn't terribly feasible. So therefore, I come back to my boundaries and my money, and I wonder whether there's the possibility of democratizing money, whether to have a money-based economy that is democratic and sustainable and socially just. And this is what I've been working on in the last 2 or 3 books I've written. Because what has happened, am I talking too long here?
We've got 5 minutes left.
I'll probably take 10, is that right?
Okay.
Can any people bear 10?
Yes.
Oh, good. I don't know if I can. So money has been privatized, and this takes I'm going to have to skip, or I have skipped a lot of the argument here, but I shall now put a plug in. If you want to know what I'm arguing here, the most recent book sort of sums it all up, and it's called Debt or Democracy, Public Money for Sustainability and Social Justice. And what I'll do is I'll just leave these flyers here, and if anybody is at all tempted by what I'm saying, please take a flyer and get a discount off the publisher. Because the starting point, and this you'll have to, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to bear with me on this and just let me make statements. And in modern economies like the UK, but not all economies across the world, different developing economies are in different stages of development. I'm talking about the highly industrialized, older market economies. As I say, things are different as you go more and more back down the development hierarchy, as it were. But what has happened in a country like Britain is that our money system has been privatized, and the only way you can get hold of any money now, new money, I mean obviously you can earn money that's circulating, but any new money that comes into this economy only comes in by bank issued debt. And this is why they keep throwing more and more money at the banks to get the economy going. What they want us to do is start borrowing again. And only if we all start borrowing again will we put new money in the economy. So that is the book explains exactly how that happened and exactly what it means. But just take it, just for now, that is the case. That new money enters our economy these days only from bank issued debt. And if you look at all the growth we've had in the economy under this 40 years of neoliberalism, it just about equates with the amount of money we've taken out in mortgages. So it's nearly all the borrowings we've done and bidding up the prices of our houses, those of you lucky to have any houses, that is really where all the growth in the economies come from. And there is a weakness in this system. If the only place you can get more money in the economy is from the bank, by people borrowing and investing, So you get your money out of the bank, you get your mortgage, or you get your business loan, or you get your personal loan, or you get your student loan, and then you participate in the economy. You pay for your student fees, you set up your business, you buy your house. Now, the weakness in the system is, first of all, you've got to be able to take on debt. You've got to be debtable, as it were. You've got to be creditworthy. But also, when it comes to paying the money back, you don't just pay back what you borrowed. You've got to pay it back with interest. Now, the trouble with that is, you can see a weakness in the economy there. As long as the money still is coming forward, there's enough money to pay back with interest. But since you've always got to pay back more than you got taken out, the system is always susceptible to a slowdown. Because if people who've got a bit of money carry on paying their debts back, but nobody's taking out any new loans, the amount of money in the economy starts to dramatically shrink. And this is what did happen after 2008. The amount of money pre-2008, the money supply in the country was growing like Topsy. And as soon as the crisis came, it started to go down. So there's a problem when you've got a money supply as debt. The main supply of public currency is created as bank loans. As I say, they explain you how that happened. You've got to read the book to find out how that happened. This is because of the neoliberal ideology of market forces. The public must never, ever, ever print money. Now, if the public must never, ever, ever print money, and you want new money in the economy, you're only left with the banks. You're left with nothing else. And this concept of everything being based on debt really pervaded development projects, didn't they? And all that stuff about microcredit. The idea of, and it was all, like all debt-based system, it was good when it started. Because like with any debt-based system, the first people into the market can make a killing. But when you're the 55th sandwich maker in your community, or you've bought the 99th cow, then you can't make enough money to pay your debts back. And this, of course, is what happened with the microcredit thing. I don't know if I've got a slide on this, but in fact, has anybody read the book by Joseph Hanlon and colleagues, Just Give Money to the Poor? And he says the best way to develop an economy, just give people the money. Forget all this microcredit, just give a pension to the older people in the community, and then they start to build economies. But I haven't got time to go into that either. Perhaps there's questions. Now, the thing about the weakness of a debt-based economy, which is what we've got, is it goes into crisis. And we're living through a crisis. We're still in the crisis. Now, the positive of that is that the only thing then that can rescue the system is public money. That's what they call quantitative easing. Again, too much to go into. But basically, it's public money created out of fresh air, out of nowhere, and just pumped into the economy. And this raised the question, so the public can print money, can it? But only to rescue the banks. Well, why, if we're pumping money into the economy in the billions to rescue the banks, why don't we pump money into the economy to rescue the people? You see, it's so simple, only an ecofeminist could think of it. So why don't we democratize money? Why don't we reclaim the public right to create money and circulate it among ourselves, to do the goods and services we need for each other that are sustainable and socially just? A democratic money for the people and the planet. And that's what I make the case for. That's why I talk about debt or democracy. I'm coming to the end now. Now, if you democratize the money supply, one of the things you can do if you're creating money and spending it straight into the economy is that you don't have to ask for it all back, because you didn't borrow it off anybody. Okay, there is such a thing as a national debt, but that's a complete con, as the book explains, and the ending up of deficit being debts is another aspect of neoliberal ideology, but that's a whole other story. But if we democratize the money supply and it's no longer based on debt, then you can have as much or as little as your economy needs or your provisioning needs. So now you do have to take some of it back, because obviously if you do pump money in over and over again, then you will cause problems. But of course, we constantly do remove money from the economy because we're constantly taxing. So there is a circuit of money. And what this in fact shows you is a deficit. There is a surplus of expenditure over the amount taken back in tax. Now, isn't it odd that nearly every country in every era has had a deficit? Does that make you think that a deficit is an odd thing to have, or a debt is actually something which most economies need? And of course, what we saw was, with my previous circuit, my bank circuit, there was a deficit in the banking system because they never had enough money to pay back. Well, look, here's the answer to the deficit in the banking system, is public deficit or surplus expenditure. The blooming market needs a deficit. They're punishing us, they're cutting all our services in the name of getting rid of the deficit. But the one part of the economy that needs the deficit is the banking circuit. And, you know, it just makes you want to throw up. It does really. What's money anyway? And what is this thing that we're in hock to? I mean, it takes all different things. It's cards, it's notes, it's internet, it's checkbooks. In fact, money is, if you go to the bank and you ask for your money out, about 3% of you could get your money back in notes and coin, because that's all the notes and coin there are in the economy. Most of you, for most of your bank accounts, you go and ask for it and all you would get is a cheque or a transfer, which would just give you another account in another bank. What money system is a system of social exchange built upon trust. We trust that our bank accounts will be honoured. We trust when we put our money in and we take our money out, people will give us goods and services for it. And the actual currency itself is certified by authority. Money system actually is a public system. The fact that it's been privatised as debt doesn't make it a private matter. It is a public matter that has been privately captured, and we have to understand that. I think money should be seen as a commons. Money should be seen, I'm just coming to the end here. Couple minutes. Money, I think I'm within my 40 minutes. I think I am. Money, I think, should be seen as a commons resource like air or water. I think money access should be seen as a democratic right. I think money creation, new money entering the system, should prioritise provisioning activities, social need and public services. I think we need to redefine wealth. We need to talk about social wealth, public wealth and ecological wealth. Oh, sorry. I shall skip the next two. What we want then is not, I think we can still have monetary exchange, but unlike the market system, where you always aim to put money into the system to get more money out, I think you can have money as not involved any kind of profit element, but you use your money to get the goods and services you need for an equivalent value. I don't think there's any need for profit and growth in the system. I think we can have the exchange of use value using money systems. And an example is a babysitting circle. If anybody's in a babysitting circle where you hand out tokens and anybody in a babysitting circle? Oh, well, that one. In the old days. Oh, well, I'll leave that. Oh, so I think this is your choice in our money system. We have a choice between debt or democracy. And I think sufficiency provisioning should be social or public money created debt-free. I think to summarise, we should have a right to livelihood. That is basic income versus microcredit. I think we need an economy not driven by profit and growth. I think we should prioritise women's work. I think we should provide an income for nature. And we should have economic democracy. And that is your choice. A debt-based money system or a money system for people and for provisioning. Thank you.
Obviously, I'm not an academic, and I haven't theorized very much about my life. I've been a journalist, and a journalist who's tried to work to sort of make the world a better place. And I felt very intimidated by this title. You know, I said to Rebecca Wells, who used to be a producer on the food program, and she asked me, and I thought, oh yeah, fine. And then about a week ago, I thought, oh God, ecofeminism, food and social justice. But then I decided to be unfrightened, that I'm a woman, I'm a feminist from way back, and my work for the last 30 years has been all about food. And my take on food is that it's one of the best ways to understand the world. Who eats, who doesn't, who has power, who doesn't, and why. And all that can be gleaned from what we consume every day. It's our constant connection to nature. And that, of course, is the premise of the food program. And I was talking to a friend yesterday, in fact, Lindy's husband, about this ecofeminism thing, and he suggested that perhaps I could work up a little something on the semiotics of the scone, but I figured I just didn't have the training. But anyway, as I thought about this and my failures as a semiotician, I thought about a story that's stuck in my mind from when I must have been 7 or 8, and some boys in the village where I lived were bullying me. And I can't remember what they were threatening, but they were threatening to, beat me up or throw mud at me or something. And I was this rather solitary child, and I thought of something that I could offer them that would, stop them throwing mud at me or, whatever it was they were going to do. And I had recently discovered where some mayflowers were growing. Mayflowers in the village where I grew up were quite uncommon. And I'd been very thrilled by the discovery of these mayflowers. So I thought I would tell them where these mayflowers were growing. And as you can all imagine, they were incredibly scornful, and they did throw mud at me, and they thought I was really stupid and a stupid girl, and and it was the first time in my life that I'd ever felt this private relationship I had with the natural world could be an object of scorn and derision, and just something what I had revealed about myself was distasteful. And in a way, all my life, I think, I've been trying to get back to that girl and what she was saying and not be ashamed. Well, as you'll gather from that story, I grew up in the countryside in a small village in Lancashire, part of that last generation of children who had almost total freedom to roam, and I roamed a lot because I was rather a solitary child with very unhappy parents who couldn't separate or get divorced because of the sexist rules of the day. But we were surrounded by hundreds of acres of woods and pastures, and that world was really my solace. And as an adult reflecting on that childhood, I understand how much it saved me from depression and breakdown, and how it saved my brother and sister. So plants and trees were my friends. I had a very lively fantasy life. I thought there was a certain group of big beech trees in the Tower Woods that were living beings, which of course we now know they were. And my mother she was a tough cookie, my mother, but she was very keen on nature and walks, and so she showed me all the things I could eat, like wild sorrel and bread and cheese, hawthorn leaves and honeysuckle flowers and pig nuts, and what I mustn't eat, like deadly nightshade and foxglove and so on. And sort of knowing that was all I needed to feel safe, and I liked having a free larder around. And yes, in fact, yesterday in Gillespie Park, the nature reserve behind Arsenal Station, I had some bread and cheese. I ate some hawthorn leaves. Anyway, over the last 2 weeks, I've been recording my life through food for the British Library's Sound Archive. And there are probably some people here, like Liz Dowler, I think, has done this. But I don't know, Liz, or anyone else, if you've been as surprised by it as I have been. I thought I was booked to talk about my life as a food journalist. And so far, we've recorded nearly 7 hours, and I've only just got to university. and the experienced interviewer who's been asking me these questions has been pushing me along and told me it's quite normal. And I don't know about you. I mean, Jeff has probably done the same thing. And I was so emotionally exhausted and washed out that I had to lie down and have a nap when she left. So anyway, in this recording, she asked me about my grandparents. Some of them I hadn't thought about that much for a long time. Anyway, 2 of them were farmers, small farmers in Northern Ireland, though of course my grandma wasn't called a farmer, she was called a farmer's wife. In fact, she ran the farm because the acres they had couldn't provide enough income for them and their 13 children. My grandfather worked as a milkman during the week in Belfast. So she milked the cows, she made the butter, which provided a fair chunk of their cash income. She fed the hens, she collected the eggs, more cash. She grew the vegetables for home cooking, mostly cabbage and potatoes, and she supervised the children in the cutting of the peat for the fire. She took care of the pigs, though it was her husband and male neighbours who killed the pigs and butchered them ready for her to cook and preserve. Her husband also took the cattle to market, and what he made there was considered to be real farming income. What my grandmother earned was considered to be pin money, though I don't actually think that was the expression that was used then in Northern Ireland. But what she did wasn't real. My other grandparents lived in the village where I was born. He was the head joiner for the De Horton estate, the village landowners. She kept house on a very small income. They had a tied cottage with a big garden, so what he got in cash reflected that. And she was a great cook and shopper. And my earliest smell memory is of warm butter spiced with mace as she potted the shrimp that she bought in Preston Market that had been collected from Morecambe Bay, that was then a cheap food. And one of the most delicious and earliest taste memories, apart from the shrimp, which is still one of my favorite foods, is of the brawn she made from pig's head. I could list so many good things that she made. The braised mutton chops on Sundays for Sunday lunch, the pea soups with ham hock on Thursdays, the crumpets for tea, the cakes, the scones. And I did list them all to the British Library, God help them. And then there was my mother, an equally good cook, though she and her mother were at odds about absolutely everything else. Apart from her children, however, she didn't have an appreciative audience at home. My father wanted just meat and 2 veg, and he hated having people in the house, so there was no outlet there for her sociability or her love of cooking for a bigger audience. She worked full-time. There were 3 children, and she worked first as a weaver in the village cotton mill, which didn't close until I was a teenager. She was a food enthusiast before food enthusiasm got media coverage. There'd be that week in the year when the traveling greengrocer, who also grew some veg in our village, had the first new potatoes. This was my mother, as far as my mother was concerned, and as far as we were concerned, it was a serious thrill. Because my mother believed in spending money on food, though she had very little money. So she'd buy the first new potatoes and she'd serve them with grilled bacon, best butter, as she always called it, and for some reason I never really questioned, frozen peas. And they were fabulous. And it was the same when she and her best friend May Worrell went mushrooming for field mushrooms. She'd come back and with the same relish, she'd make mushroom soup, a soup I've been trying to recreate ever since and failed, or mushrooms on toast with cream. Or the same when she went to Blackburn Market and there was great tripe on the tripe stall, this honeycomb tripe that she loved. So all that's just a taster of what I found myself telling the British Library interviewer. And I could go on here as I did to her, but I don't think you've got 7 hours. But what telling all this got me to understand properly for the first time is why I do what I do. And the way that food as a pleasure is built into my bones, just as food as a way of understanding injustice is also built into my bones. Though I didn't put those 2 things together as the basis for work until I was in my mid-30s. What my 2 grandmothers and my mother did was given no public value. They just shopped and cooked. They just held families together. My grandma Dillon just made pin money from farming that wasn't considered to be farming. So I left home, I went to university, and then I went to Finland, and then I went to the United States, and then New Zealand, and back to the United States as someone who liked to cook and eat and shop for food. At university, I had a group of friends who cooked for each other, and they introduced me to Elizabeth David. And until then, I'd been using Catherine Whitehorn's Cooking in a Bedsit, which some of you of my generation may remember. It was the 1960s, you know, when we'd cook each other dishes, you know, and I can still remember some of them. You know, her wine harvest dish of white grapes and oxtail, or her pork chops with prunes and cream. But I learned some important lessons on the way. Finland showed me that my mother's relish for what was local and seasonal could be lived by an entire society. People in the region of Häme, where I was living, were tremendously proud of their local foods. And I'd never actually come across that before, because although my mother was this enthusiast, there was no sense in Lancashire then of, you know, isn't this great? Isn't Lancashire cheese marvellous? You know, it was just an accepted thing that we all ate. So it was, the food I ate in Finland was just wonderful. It was transforming, really, to properly understand what localism was about. But while I was there, I also travelled to St. Petersburg over Easter on my own. And the emptiness, the hopelessness of Soviet communism was completely obvious through the scarcity of food and the badness of the cooking. And I wrote back to Leicester University to one of my lefty friends about what I thought Soviet communism was, you know, bankrupt and hopeless and doomed. And she wrote back and told me that I was suffering from false consciousness. New Zealand taught me about the dead hand of British colonial cooking and British attitudes to food. I'd never before encountered the middle class, food is something well brought up people don't talk about attitude. Because apart from a few university friends and my tutors, I hadn't known many middle class British people. New Zealand had the best ingredients and the worst cooking I'd ever encountered. And some of the most terrible, soul-deadening meals of my life were eaten in Christchurch, New Zealand. They were a sort of parody of what British cooking, or what the world used to think about British cooking, which had absolutely nothing to do with the food I'd grown up on. But it was living in the States for the second time that brought all my unregarded feelings and thoughts and enthusiasms about food together into something that altered the course of my life. It was 1980 and I was living in Manhattan. I was cooking for pleasure and shopping in the butchers and greengrocers around me in Amsterdam, on Broadway in Amsterdam. I had a baby, I was weaning him onto solid food, and I was freelancing for the glossy magazines on feminist subjects that at that time even Condé Nast used to cover. But then there was a pesticide scandal on Long Island, which then was a major potato growing area. They still grow potatoes. And they had this pesticide called Temic, which that's the trade name, called Aldicarb. And it was planted with the potatoes, and the potatoes took it up, and it was supposed to totally degrade in 100 days, I read. Well, it hadn't, and it had seeped into the water supply. The water supply was still, the aquifer was still providing water for some communities on Long Island, so people were getting sick. And so water was tanked in, and I read this in my morning New York Times, and I thought, well, I mean, I thought what most of you here would think. You'd think, okay, if it's in the water, isn't it in the potatoes? And of course the answer was, yes, it is in the potatoes. But the United States government's Environmental Protection Agency set out to reassure us there was no problem because the aldicarb residues were within the officially set limits. So if you were eating the normal amount of potatoes, you were fine. Well, normal turned out to be something based on the amount of potatoes an adult male ate, and that was calculated to be 3 or 4 potatoes a week. And I had this young baby. And so I thought, you know, are there residue limits for babies and me? And no, there were no babies. So given his weight, he was eating far more aldicarb than was normal. Anyway, I was outraged. And I really thought, even though I considered myself pretty politically savvy, that there were experts out there who were looking out for us, you know, ensuring that our food, at least our general food supply, was safe. So then I did some research on how pesticide residue limits were set, and I realized it had almost nothing to do with human health. And you know, all of you who are doing food policy know all this, but it was news to me. And the agribusiness interests involved in setting the limits with government agencies obviously didn't want us to drop dead after eating the potatoes or the soybeans, but long term, well, you know, who could really know? I mean, you've got Parkinson's 25 years later. Who knows? So did anyone do any testing on babies or teenagers or pregnant women? No. Did they test aldicarb or any other pesticide in conjunction with any of the other pesticides that we ingest in real life? No. So I was being incredibly naive. I hadn't been paying attention, because if you think about it, that date was 18 years after Rachel Carson had published Silent Spring. It was as though everything I'd ever thought and everything I knew about food came into focus. And the more I read in the New York Public Library down there in Times Square, pre-Google and laptops, and the more I saw that the US food system was not a joke for good cooks living privileged lives like me. It was a how-to book on late free market capitalism, how power operated, winners and losers. It was all there in the food system. It was all there in the food I was feeding my baby. Efficiency. The war on nature in the name of economic efficiency, which, as you know from Mary's talk, has absolutely nothing to do with efficiency as you and I understand it. It's about the most efficient way of making the most money and efficiently pushing off the costs of doing that onto taxpayers. Out of our taxes and personal incomes, we pay for cleaning up watercourses from pesticide and fertilizer runoff, and the health costs, both long and short term. And short term, then, there were plenty of examples. In the 1980s, aldicarb was responsible for the largest pesticide poisoning ever recorded in the United States. When it was found in a large harvest of watermelons. 1,000 people were made ill. In 1992, 30 people in Ireland got sick from aldicarb poisoning in cucumbers. Aldicarb isn't approved for use on cucumbers. Lots and lots of cases were well documented. But it went on being used for years afterwards. It's no longer approved in the EU, but 2015 was the last year that it was allowed to be used in the United States, which is a very, very long time since what happened in Long Island. But I'm not here to talk about pesticides. What aldicarb in New York City did for me was give me my first clear understanding of food as a technology, a way of maximizing profit when nature is the enemy. And the idea of working with nature is contemptible, woolly, muck and magic, pie in the sky, idealistic, soft-headed, impractical, silly, in short, you might say, thoroughly female. As I'm often told, and I was told this at a conference that I chaired last week by a man on the board of the British Nutrition Foundation, funded, as most of you know, by Kellogg, Coca-Cola, Tate & Lyle, etc., he said, "You have to get real, Sheila." He said, "Artisan producers are not going to feed the 9 billion. We need technology. You just don't give enough credit to the good the food industry and the big retailers do. The way they've made it possible for a single mum in a tower block to eat well." Well, he may have a point, but it's an argument, or rather a dismissal, full of more assumptions that need to be dismantled than I can get my head around in a passing conversation. But to go back to New York City, what I did with my new insights and anger was to volunteer to write for a magazine called Food Monitor, which was about food as a way to understand the world. And Susan George, author of How the Other Half Die, and I'm sure Mary knows her work on debt, was on the board of that magazine. And pushed by my financial journalist husband, who said, if you're going to write about food, then follow the money, I offered to write a column for them called Food Biz. And this meant I had to monitor all the business media, Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Forbes, The Economist, etc., to follow what the big food companies were doing. And if you're going to be a food journalist, it was a very good education. And it gave me living day-to-day substance. It gave a living day-to-day substance to what I'd seen in my early Aldicarb research about the power of free market capitalism, about food production as a money-making enterprise first and last, and its unparalleled ability to crowd out other arguments about food as health, food as culture, food as social glue, food as pleasure, You know, as you saw, you know, Mary's voice seems a radical one. Why is it radical? I mean, it's just extraordinary what she's saying. I mean, it's perfectly sensible and sane, but she and people like her, even Paul Krugman, who won the Nobel Prize for talking about economics in those terms, gets pushed to the very fringes as being a crackpot. You know, you're just too left to count in this economy. Anyway, after a few months, I was offered a proper job at Food Monitor, and my 2 years there coincided with the full early force of Reaganomics, the unraveling of the legal framework that controlled the creation of industry monopolies and protected workers. Workers then, I know it's hard to believe, but workers then in the meat industry were some of the best paid in the entire food industry. And when I first started at Food Monitor, the US meat industry was made up of dozens, if not hundreds, of companies. By the time I'd left, the smaller ones had been gobbled up, and blacklegs had been used by the big corporations to break up the unions. And as you'll all know from Fast Food Nation and more recent analyses of the meat industry in the United States, that industry is now one of the most dangerous places to work in the US and one of the very, very worst paid. And what it does to animals is just another issue. So when I moved back to Britain in the mid-1980s, I was asked to contribute to a book called Out of Focus, Writings on Women in the Media. And 2 days ago, I dusted off my old copy, which I probably hadn't read in 25 years. And I reread the chapter that I'd written on women and food production in the Third World to prepare for this. And what I documented then, and others have documented in a more scholarly fashion at greater length before that and since, it really hasn't changed in the 28 years since that book was published. No matter how successful women are at feeding others, like my grandma Dillon, their experience somehow doesn't count. I mean, I feel greatly grateful to Mary that I understand this better now. I wrote in that book about what was then a recent EU audit, which showed that the EU's micro aid projects, which mostly involved women, were the most effective way of providing aid. Minimum waste, minimum corruption, and positive change that seemed to last. Great. The EU said at the time that they were going to increase the money for micro projects, but at the same time, all the staff in Brussels exclusively concerned with micro projects were being got rid of or moved into other areas of aid. So micro projects were going to be handed over to country desk officers. Almost all of them at the time were men, who were then responsible for the aid programs within one country. And so you can imagine what attention 50 projects involving £25,000 might get when the same person was responsible for 4 or 5 multi-million-pound projects with a clear conventional chain of accountability, even if much of that money did end up in Swiss bank accounts. My recent reading doesn't suggest there's been much serious change in these attitudes. At the same conference last week, I was talking to a man who's involved in agricultural training with small farmers in several African countries. Though women are producing, as we know, up to 80% of the food eaten in Africa, he told me it's the men who are getting the grants to take the courses. I feel like I've been a feminist since I was 5 or 6 or whenever it was, and given when I saw the raw deal that my mother got. And sort of as an aside, you know, if any of you young women are ever tempted by all the retro fashions to feel nostalgic about the 1950s, I would seriously advise you not to. The 50s were disastrous for women. But I didn't actually get involved in the women's movement properly until 1969 or 1970 when I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I was working for a big publishing company in Boston. And like all the women there, I was earning half what my male colleagues were earning. So along with 5 other underpaid, highly educated women, we sued them and we won. And I got strength, thank you, and I got strength and ideas and support for doing that from the consciousness raising group I belonged to. That's what we did in those days. And wonderfully, oddly, given what I did later, we often met at Julia Child's house in Cambridge. One of our group was helping with her with a project. I didn't really know who Julia Child was then, but she had a very nice house. In the 40 years since then, what we've all, I say all, but what we've been working on is what a world could be like without the power imbalances that have marked relations between men and women. And we can see that the horrible male backlash to all that questioning on social media, all that fear of change, which so quickly turns into hate. And I've seen the coming together of the green movement, the movement that's raised all these questions about nature and efficiency and economics and the true cost of how we produce food, with a development in thinking about feminism. A serious relationship with nature, I think, is essential to feminism. I made a series of notes when I was feeling very nervous about standing up here and talking on the same platform as Mary Mellor. And my first note said, chicken and egg, what comes first, contempt for women or contempt for nature? I don't know the answer to that, but I've actually had a better idea since listening to Mary's talk. But I think those boys who bullied me and were contemptuous of my offering of the secret places where mayflowers grew, that tells us a lot about the world I've tried to make sense of through the food program. We are animals, and as the Bible says, we are as grass. Thank you.
What I'm noticing now, and you asked me where we were at now, is this inclusion, that everybody must be included in a debate about whether you have this, that, or other policy. And it's reaching a extent where the corporations are actually there. They're almost taking over the UN or whatever. They are actually saying that you cannot have governments or others making wise decisions unless corporations are around the table and influencing what happens. And it's absolutely terrifying. I've just come back from Uganda, and I just was asked to give a talk on conflicts of interest, basically, to a whole load of African policymakers there. And it was so obvious that everyone was being told that they could not make their policies unless they reached consensus with these corporate partners. And when I was going into the hospitals and seeing what was happening, actually, with the babies and whatever, there's all this mixed thinking going on. And like you were saying there about the corporates, I don't know how we're going to get round this, because so many people now are reliant on this money, reliant on actually partnering up, and we can't extract them from that policy setting process. So I'm sorry if it's a bit confused, but that's what I'm looking to you, Mary, as well, to how do we come to some sort of sensible policy setting that's really in the interests of the public and citizens, and see that corporations have a totally different perspective on everything. And of course they must be there, and we can't kill them all off or anything. I'm not recommending that. But they have a place, and that is not in policy setting. And I just wonder what you feel about that, because I see it as an incredibly destructive thing in terms of everything we're talking about, environment and good food and good health. Thanks. Sorry, a bit of a long question that, wasn't it?
Okay, I mean, something there about the lack of value we put on the public, maybe.
Yeah, I think this all goes back to the unbalanced nature of our economies. It goes back to funding, it gets back to who's got the money, it's got the fact that there's too much sloshing around in the commercial sector looking for investment opportunities and the cheapest way to do things, and a decline in the public and the social, and particularly the funding of the public and the social, to be autonomous, to be able to get these people off your backs. And so I think it is all part of the neoliberal market first. It's part of that whole thing. And until we can rescue social autonomy and public autonomy, they've still got a stranglehold on us because they pull the purse strings constantly. So I think it's one big battle. It's one interconnected battle. And in a sense, you're having to fight it situation by situation, because you're particularly in the baby milk things. There's the sugar stuff where the companies are pussyfooting with that. There's the whole banking sector, which is resisting any reform or any change in more general terms. But I think it's a house of cards. I think if we can pull one leg of it out, as it were, perhaps the banking sector or perhaps the health sector, then I think the credibility of the whole structure will start to implode. Because we've not always been like this. We've not always been so market dominated. It really is just the last 40 years it's just been as bad as it is. Now, could I say something just general, really? Sheila mentioned about the Soviet Union and the failures there. Overly public, too much public central planning, that didn't work. We've tried the full market system, and that doesn't work. It's to nobody's benefit, really. What I'm hoping to do is re-establish the balance between the public and the market. And that's my aim, to find some middle path where we have sufficiency and we're not with growth and profit. We're just trying to meet people's needs in the best and most appropriate way possible.
I have a question. I don't quite know. I feel as hopeless as you do about. I just see corporates getting into every form of decision making and then entering into this what was public, and then we can't find out anything about them because it's commercial confidentiality. Kath Dalmeny has thought about this probably more than anyone else I know, and Jeff Tansey. But my question is really to you, Mary, is do you think, you want to return to this balance, do you think the ecological problems which are now, let's just take type 2 diabetes, these problems which are caused by the free market play, the lack of control, the absurdity of the things like the responsibility deals, do you think that the overwhelming cost of some of these things is actually going to help rebalance, to show that the free market, the neoliberal free market system cannot go on because we'll bankrupt the world?
Absolutely. I think there are so many holes in the neoliberal system is an ideology. It's a religion. It's an ideology. It is not efficient. It is not effective. It doesn't bring us happiness. How come that we've had a 40-year free market system that has turned us from a nation of homeowners into a nation of renters? It's completely undermined what was the basis of conservatism with a small c. It was always these very confident I own my own house, therefore I'm going to be conservative. Well, how come that it has destroyed what seemed to be the cushy, middle of the road, Middle England? So I think, in a sense, that these corporations will, in the end, destroy themselves, in a sense, because they will destroy. Once they lose the faith of the people, I think they'll lose it very quickly, and that's what we've got to do. But the press doesn't really help us, does it? I can't be more cheerful.
From the floor, so maybe we'll take all three of them, and then you can come back.
Thanks, Jeff Tansey. Really interesting, the point you made about what makes the fat cats stay fat. I think it's Susan George's point from How the Other Half Dies: study the rich and powerful, not the poor and powerless, if you want to understand the way the system's going. One of those areas is law, of course. And when we're talking about corporations, I wonder if we've got kind of mega economic man in the fact that corporations are treated as legal persons, giving the same rights as human beings, trying to claim them as human rights, which needs to be resisted everywhere, but also have limited liability for their actions, many of them if they're publicly listed, which you and I don't. So I think we need to also connect into law. I also wonder, Mary, how you view positive money and the development that's going on there with that movement. People trying to say that, you know, basically interest-bearing, debt-based economies can do nothing but cause a problem because they continuously require expanding in consumption and so forth, and link into the ecological crisis as well. I think, too, I'd like to pick up on the food banks thing. I would like to see some positive points where we can see possibilities for change. Having just chaired this Fabian Commission on Food and Poverty, we're doing follow-up work now around the country, talking to people who are moved by the fact, as you know, no one thinks anyone should starve, and they're taking action to do something at a charitable level, and that needs to be moved beyond that. So we're now trying to interact with people right throughout the country, and I think there are seeds of where people can connect, and we need to link this kind of the theoretical work to the practical stories and the things that you were talking about, Sheila, that grounds it in people's experience, and we need more of that. And just to do another little plug, if you want to look at a lot of the issues on food and poverty are highly gendered, whether you're talking about the UK or whether you're talking about globally. This new Food Systems Academy, which I'm going to plug, where Caroline Steele there, he's got a talk on it, and Liz Dowler and others, has one about gender and food and farming as well. And sharing knowledge and experience is one of the key challenges that we have, to look at some positive vision of the future. I was at a talk by Paul Allen from the Centre for Alternative Technology this morning, saying how we can't decarbonise this country by 2050. They've mapped out how we can do it, and we've got too much dystopian thinking that's the dominant, and we need this mindset that has a positive, and food is a really positive thing. It's fun, it's enjoyable, it's sharing, it's social and cultural. So it's about trying to connect these specifics into that in a vision, and that gives people some way of hope, I think, and out of it, but also tackles this kind of legal structures that we've got that embed these corporations in what we've got.
My name is Mark Charlton. I'm a student of environmental humanities and a writer. I have a question for you both, but first just a comment. Can you hear me okay? Like you, Sheila, I experienced bullying in Lancashire where I grew up too. And I was always quite confused about it, in a similar way to you, with the kind of alignment of my values to nature and to the environment. And I think, in light of what you said about gender and how important that is in the debate, I see it really as the masculine, as a symbolism really being threatened, and how feminism, or the female metaphor, is a threat to that kind of icon of masculinity. So that leads me onto my question about the first question is, how do you, Mary, feel about the notion of universal, UBI, about having a kind of your basic income, about having a kind of income for everybody? And the second question is, I'm really passionate about introducing environmental stewardship to the UK, because I've experienced a lot of land-based work for the past couple of years around the UK and around Europe. And I've approached the UK military about having a kind of similar land army scheme to what used to happen in the kind of post World War II. And I just wanted your advice on it, really, in terms of it's met with a lot of horror and a lot of bias and a lot of kind of alpha masculinity around why I'm interested in vegetables and flowers and trees. So yeah, that was my other question. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm Annika Knupper. I'm a PhD student in epidemiology and public health, and from background nutritional scientist. And thank you very much for these awesome eye-opening talks first. What I kind of take home from this is that this is more like a topic of to kind of bring these things together, like for food to become really a social and sustainable and for everyone healthy thing. It has to be in a completely different environment. That kind of the economic environment that we have at the moment does not enable to do all these things. So it kind of looks like for me that this is a topic that has to go into kind of really the high politics, and it feels like you can't make this like in a public health ministry or in an environment ministry. Like that's too small. Would you agree with that, or would you say there are some examples? Can you think of some examples where it's still going in the right direction without having like this, I would call it systems change that might be needed to really, or is there any hope apart from that?
Thank you.
Is there hope?
That's one for you, Sheila.
Well, I just
I'll
like.
do the money, you do the
Okay.
head.
Well, I just. I know I've got a microphone on my lapel. I mean, I think what Jeff said about what we can learn from Susan George. I mean, how the other half dies a long time ago, but there's been very little studying the rich and powerful. I mean, it's a very small portion of what sociology and food policy and that's what we should be doing, studying the rich and powerful. But of course, the takeover by our media of the rich and powerful, and if the BBC goes down the tubes for all its faults, we are seriously up a creek. So I don't know what to say about that, apart from saying you're spot on, you're right. I mean, but you want to say answer what Jeff asked about money.
Yeah, gosh, there's so much to think about. Undeniably, the rich have got inestimably richer, and they don't want to pay their way, and this is setting the people against them. I think the rich had the kind of ideological power on their side when they said, oh, we're providing you work, we're providing nice things for you, we're building you cars, we're building you computers. But now I think people are saying, to the rich, what are you doing for us? You're taking your money offshore, you're hiding your tax. So I think the rich are losing they're losing the high ground, as it were, and rightly they should. And I think the more the tax exposure and things like that goes, the better it is. So that's one of the pincher movements, I think. The other one are the alternative money perspectives, which were mentioned, like positive money. And there is an awful lot of thinking around that's all saying the same thing as I'm saying in various different ways. And there is a building up, not just of ideological statements about we ought to have public money, we ought to have democratic money, but theoretical proof. You see, what I'm arguing, I don't think is I'm arguing how things should be. I'm arguing how things are. There is public money. There is public money circulating. And but it's all going to benefit the market. That's how the fat cats are getting fatter and fatter. So, I mean, one of the main that positive money wants to do is take away the right of banks to create any new money. They can only lend what people deposit and invest in them. Well, if they do that, then your bank accounts will disappear because they'll be in somebody's mortgage. So it shows that all this debt is providing new money. So what we've got to do is capture it back, and positive money are arguing for the money being given back to the public to spend on public purposes. Any new money entering the economy should be put to use, first of all, for public purpose. That's the basic bottom line. Bottom line's a very financial thing to say, isn't it? On this basic income idea, I'm sort of hovering between it. I think basic income shouldn't come from taxation, because that's just recirculating money you've already got, and it can't be afforded. So basic income will only work if it's new money. It's got to be new money. And I'm perfectly happy with the idea of giving people money, but I'm not sure that's the best use of new money. I think new money should go through public goods and services first, or social goods and services. So rather than being distributed sort of per capita, I think it should be used for public purpose, and then go in wages and services. But at the same time, what I mentioned before is that in some developing countries, or countries that are less commercialized and monetized than we are, this idea of giving money to the poor, and it being much better than microcredit, which just burdens people. And what they find is that it's not a lot. You don't have to give a lot of money to people for them to make very, very positive economic choices. You just have to make sure that it's fairly distributed, which means distributed quite widely, and it is regular and certain. And as soon as it's regular and certain, people can start making long-term economic decisions. And one of the first decisions they found that poor families do when they've got a guaranteed income into their family is they send the children back to school. So I think there is space for... Now, we've got the example of Utrecht, I think, which is setting up a basic income scheme as an experiment, distributing it to the country. So I'm sort of half and half on basic income. I think I think it could do good, but I think you need money for public purpose and providing goods and services. I think you can't just hand it out to people, because you'll end up just with a market system, I think. I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
I'm a bit, can I just an odd comment? I mean, I'm a bit pessimistic about people, feeling, sort of understanding what corporations are doing, and then, changing, sort of grabbing some power. I mean, I think about, the notion of corporate socialism, which has been much discussed in the United States for quite a long time. There is socialism in the United States, and it's for corporations. They get tax breaks, they get subsidies, the whole economy is geared to make their lives simple and good and prosperous. And last night I was having dinner with some Americans who didn't know much about food, and we were talking about Mexico and about the drug situation in Mexico. Well, I think you can take the drug, what is going on, the gangsterism, the murders, the dislocation and the breakdown of society, you can take it back to the North American Free Trade Agreement between Mexico and the United States, where during the peso crisis, the Americans forced the Mexicans to accept this free trade agreement, which ended up in undercutting the price of corn in Mexico. Then the great import of subsidized corn, corporate socialism corn, came in from the United States. Meanwhile, the American justification for this trade agreement was that the Mexican government was subsidizing small farmers. Small farmers flooded to the cities, no jobs. The land was freed up for drug production. That's a trade agreement which was supposed to bring prosperity to a large part of a big country in South America. And look what's happened. And yet, does anybody talk about that in terms of TTIP? I mean, does anybody say, we've had all these promises before. Why aren't we, because the media, it's not sexy, I don't know. Why don't we talk about these things? Why don't we, Jeff?
So we talked about it for a whole session in our master's courses. So we've got two more.
Yeah, and Carolyn too.
We've got one.
And we haven't answered your question, I'm sorry.
We have to finish at 6, but there will be time to speak during the reception. So I have two here.
Hi, hello. Thank you for your fantastic talks and experiences. I'm a PhD student on food security in SOAS, and my question is for Mary. It's rather methodological. So I would like to know a little bit more maybe about how ecofeminism deals with racial and class issues and discrimination of racial and class issues and intersectionality between this discrimination, which are the pillar of neoliberalism, and how it works. Thank you.
Can we have the other comment as well?
Hi, I'm Amadi. Is this working?
It doesn't amplify.
Okay, right. And I'm working with a community project that works with people who use food banks. I think at the end of the day, we can't eat the money, yeah? Especially the new plastic money that's coming out. My concern is perhaps if we're spending a lot of time observing the rich, we're not necessarily helping people such as the users of food banks think about the food that they're eating. I remember going to a food fair for health food shops and speaking to some of the people who were producing all these new nutri-foods and asking them, well, do you eat this stuff yourself? And one man saying to me, of course we don't eat it. We can afford not to eat it, but we're selling it to you guys. And thinking to myself that we're not very critical about what the corporates are doing and helping the general public to be a lot more critical, a lot more inquiring about what food is and what the different qualities of food are. And, thinking about your question here about the intersectionalities, if we were to do surveys of migrant or immigrant populations and their links to rural areas and good quality food, would that make it less or more sexy, given the status of migrant and immigrant populations in the UK?
We started a bit late, so I'm going to take a chairman's prerogative and say we're going to go on a few minutes late because there were at least two people's hands came up. I think you can both have a question.
Thank you. This feels weird to hold a microphone that doesn't actually microphone, but anyway. Thank you for two really fantastic and thought-provoking and important talks. I'm wrestling with these kinds of issues at the moment myself, so please forgive me for a set of provisional comments. But I think the money question and the food question are fundamentally connected, and I think the fact that they're not seen as connected is almost the problem. I've been reading Aristotle and various other Greeks recently, and Aristotle makes it. I mean, Mary, your description of the feminization of the state as the household fascinated me because what Aristotle says, as I'm sure you know in his Politics, is he makes a distinction between oikos nomos, which is basically the basis of economy, which is the maintenance of the household, and krematistike, which is the unfettered pursuit of wealth. And he sees the household as the basis of the state. So I'm not lecturing you, I'm just sort of saying it because to get the thoughts out there. And he says that oikos nomos is the basis of a good life because it's about what you would call provisioning, I believe. In other words, working in order to sustain yourself. And if the polis then bases itself on everybody having a sort of good household management, then there's a functioning state and a good life can be had for everyone. Krematistike, on the other hand, is what I would call sort of money emancipated from the basis of provisioning, so very much as you framed it. And he sees this as a threat, and he says, basically people who pursue krematistike for its own sake, they want a good life, but they want a life, but they don't want a good life. They don't understand the basis of it. So that was very interesting to me. Another interesting thing is that Xenophon, Economicus, so I'm still stuck in Greece, has a really interesting description of what good household management is. And it's based on the man doing the quote-unquote outdoor stuff and the woman doing the indoor stuff. And I think right there you can already see the basis of the problem we're talking about. Right back in ancient Greece, you can see that what the woman does is indoors, it's hidden, it's the realm of idion, the realm of the idiot. And the man is out and about sort of taking his horse on sort of war manoeuvres and, you know, kind of ordering the slaves about, basically. I mean, of course, they have slaves as well, which is another issue. So that's one set of ideas that I think are really interesting to revisit in terms of, you know, one of the very earliest sort of conceptions of what the polis might be based on in terms of the economics of the household, and yet how the woman was even framed out of that discussion. There's another, leaping forward to the Industrial Revolution. I mean, I think this idea of the emancipation of money from what I would call the friction of food, which is the only thing in our lives that has real identifiable value. You know, in other words, it is the ultimate value in use item. And I'm just going to stop talking. But there's a brilliant, I don't know whether you know this book, but the Great Transformation by Karl Polanyi. Very much so. So I'm just getting it in the room, really. He talks about the commodification of man and of the land, and how this is again the basis of an economy that's not really grounded in reality and the most important thing, which is obviously feeding ourselves. So anyway, sorry, Minnie, wasn't really a question. It was just a thank you and some comments.
I'll try and be very quick. I feel like I've stepped into a beautiful magic bubble where everybody is talking complete sense. And this happens so rarely in the food world, and all, you know, most of the other places I hang out, like in government and corporations and all the places we interact with, don't talk complete sense. So I'm going to ask you, it's slightly a hope question. How do we get people to take off their economic man glasses and put on their food and ecofeminism glasses and see it like we do?
Buy my book and read it.
But how do we get everybody else to read it? Do you both want to have
I mean, I don't know if you heard the food program on Sunday, but it was B. Wilson with the Jeff Whitehouse, I think he's called, and their son, his son Anthony, and who've made this film called Fixing Dad. And, you know, so B. Wilson has written this book gathering all the research there is in the world, neuroscientists and psychologists and nutritionists, showing that, you know, our tastes are plastic. You know, we can learn to take food seriously. If we learn to take pleasure in food, we can change. You know, whole societies can change. You know, Japan changed, Finland changed, and although when I was there it didn't seem to need it, but anyway. And then you've got these two boys who, their father, what you saw was this man who 5 McDonald's a day, and he just thought everything that was $1.99, well, what's to worry about? You know, $1.99, great. You know, let's have 5 of them every day. Junk. So he gets type 2 diabetes when he's 45, and finally when he's in his late 50s, you know, he's heading for foot amputation, and I know it's ridiculous, but kind of love saved him. And the problem is, as B. Wilson shows in her book, that we're also confused about food, and it's all wrapped up with, you know, what we get at the table and what we don't get at the table, and the things that Patty, you know, when she's saying that, you know, why do we have a baby food industry? It's rubbish. We don't need a baby food industry. Nobody needs a baby food industry except in emergencies. I mean, it's fine as a micro thing, but you know,
There's a banana. Yeah.
What? I don't know. I mean,
yeah, that's important. Yes, I mean, no.
But we could start with a food. We could start with projects like Rebecca Wells is doing. You know, in the primary school in Hackney. You know, teaching young kids to garden and cook. I mean, the only way you ever change is through pleasure and joy and happiness and love. You don't change through being threatened or finger wagged, or that doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I don't know, I wish I had an answer.
Given the short amount of time, I think I really must answer the question of intersectionality, because that is an important one. There was great worries about the ecofeminism movement, that it was led by white northerners, and it would become ghettoed as a white northern movement. And there were dangers of that. But but a lot of ecofeminist writers have said that you remember my slide that had the dialectics of humans and nature, and I said that there were the structures of power intersected between individuals and nature. Well, you don't just put gender in there. You put racism. You put sexuality. You can put all different intersecting, being colonized. Are all mechanisms of the powerful to gender to structure their relationship with nature. So I think a lot of ecofeminist writings, like Maria Mies's work on patriarchy and accumulation on a world scale. So I think this has been taken account of. There is intersectionality in the organisations, but I do have a slight worry, and it came home is something about the celebration of subsistence by northern green writers as well as ecofeminist writers, and I wonder whether they are putting an impetus to remain in subsistence of people in cultures who perhaps don't want to remain in subsistence. And this was brought home to me when I went many years ago to a conference in Australia, and it was a conference about environmentalism. And they said, it's wonderful, we're going to get the indigenous people are going to come and speak to us, the Aboriginal people are going to come speak to us, a leader is going to come and speak to us. And all these mainly white audience, a very white audience, all sat and waited for this guy to come. And he stood up there and he said, it's our land. If we want to mine it, if we want to dam it, if we want to sell it, that's up to us. It's our land. It's not up for you people to come and tell us what to do. And the audience, absolutely, their mouths fell open, you know, because they come with this kind of beatific idea of the wonderful communication. And the thing the guy said was, you're always listening to the old men. Stop listening to the old men. Listen, and of course he was representing the young men. Well, I don't know what the women thought. But I think this whole notion of intersectionality and the political agenda, the agenda of the environment, I think is a minefield. And as a white northerner, I don't know, I don't think I am justified in pronouncing on it. I need to hear many voices. I think it was right to hear the voice of that male leader, but like I said, I'd love to have heard the women. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think we will have to come to a close now. I want to really thank both our speakers very much. It was both really stimulating talks that have made a really fantastic start for this series.